Okay, if you're a frequent watcher of my channel, you're already aware that I have a lot to say when it comes to critiquing Pixar's way of doing things. But as I've said before, I actually do enjoy Pixar movies, and my videos on them are only born out of a place of concern. But that being said, instead of once again going over everything that I believe Pixar does wrong, today I'd like to talk about the company in a more positive light. Specifically, go over the movie that I believe to be their absolute magnum opus and represents not only an excellent company at the top of their game, but the highest tier of filmmaking that all aspiring writers and directors should desire to reach. And that movie is their 2008 offering, Wall-E. But before we get into it, I would just like to give my usual warning that there will be spoilers for this movie ahead. So if you haven't seen it yet, you should probably click off this video and come back to it another day. I will be giving out no other spoiler warnings here. Alright. Now I know that this is something of a controversial opinion, as I've seen quite a few different people argue over what they believe to be Pixar's masterpiece, ranging from The Incredibles, which I've already made a separate video on and you can find a link in the description to Ratatouille, to many others. But I do honestly believe that the distinction must go to Wall-E. Though I do understand why there would be so many varied opinions on the subject, as Pixar has released so many good movies that if most of them were made by any other studio, they would probably be considered its respective magnum opus hands down. But I just feel that when you take a look at all of Pixar's offerings and compare them to each other, that Wall-E is the one that stands the highest. But please do note here that I'm not saying Wall-E is my personal favorite Pixar movie, as it actually isn't, though it does rank pretty highly up there. I'm just saying that if someone were to ask me what I believe Pixar's masterpiece was, I'd say this movie without a moment's hesitation. And let me explain to you why that is. Now let me just start off by saying the beauty of this movie lies in its simplicity. There's no complex theme or moral here, and before you say it, any and all messages concerning the environment were completely unintentional and only used as a plot device according to the director. This movie is simply a robot falling in love and a nice little lesson on how sometimes you must do the right thing and not run away from your problems even when it's hard and challenging to do so. Other than that, the movie is extremely straightforward, and if you ask me, it very much benefits from that. And this simplicity also extends to how the movie itself is presented. Because for the first 40 minutes, there's almost no dialogue at all to be had, and yet you always understand exactly what's going on. Honestly, this is perhaps storytelling without dialogue at its finest, and in many ways recalls to me how movies used to be made all the way back in the silent era. Now, I know that some believe that the movie would have been better off sticking to this approach for the entire runtime, but I disagree. Because while it's used beautifully for the first 40 minutes, I think it could have easily overstayed its welcome and probably would have started to bore the audience if it stayed that way for too long. And thus, I think it was smart to introduce the humans in new setting when they did, thus allowing for something the audience was more used to and allowing for a, shall we say, more traditional explanation for what's going on and why Earth is the way it is. In other words, I feel these two very different styles are blended here perfectly and honestly complement each other really well. And then there are the characters. And if you ask me, this is where the movie really shines. I know everybody loves the captain, and I honestly have no problem seeing why. Instead of being incompetent or lazy, he's just bored and complacent, believing he has no higher purpose but wishing he did. Then, after learning a little about Earth's history and realizing the truth of what's become of it, he decides that he's going to do the right thing, get his ship back to Earth, and restore the planet to its former glory, and no stupid steering wheel is going to get in his way. Honestly, he's everything you could ever want in a leader. He's competent, smart, enthusiastic, self-reliant, determined, and motivated by the interest of others, even if they're planets in this case. Really, only Pixar could make a man standing up absolutely epic, and that's exactly what it is. Motivated by his determination to do the right thing, as well as Wall-E's sacrifice, this man does what nobody has done in centuries and finally puts that dang wheel in its place once and for all, showing it who's truly boss. But I'll get back to the significance of that later. But speaking of Otto, he's also the perfect villain for a movie like this. He has no goals, no malicious intent, and no grudge. He just has orders to carry out, and he will carry them out no matter what. That's why I've always found his line irrelevant interesting when the captain is trying to reason with him. Because to Otto, it truly doesn't matter if he was right or wrong. All that matters is that he was given an order, and if what you're saying doesn't have to do with that, then as far as he's concerned, you're not saying anything of value. Basically, Otto is the perfect example of what happens when you obey orders without question and carry them out whether it actually helps or harms your overall goals. He's a literal drone and the absolute embodiment of ignorance, refusing to try and understand his purpose and just doing as he's told, even as it does more harm than good. And the exact same applies to go for as well. And speaking of that, the perfect foil for him in this regard is Mo, because he's also a robot that's determined to carry out his orders no matter what. But the difference here is that Mo can understand the significance of a purpose higher than those orders. For instance, when he sees the dirt trail left behind by Wall-E, he's caught in a dilemma between two orders: the need to disinfect and the need to follow his predetermined path. Now, Otto would probably follow the path, as to him that's the more direct and thus important order. However, Mo understands that it's more important that the ship be decontaminated, free, and clean of disease. So he instead leaves his predetermined path, but only so he can follow the more truly important order. And for a long time he does just that and feverishly cleans everything in his path until he finally catches up with Wall-E. And once again, he shows his ability to understand this concept when after finding the plant, he goes out of his way to get it where it needs to go instead of trying to clean it. Because once again, he's willing to understand what's more important in this situation, and that the plant is not a threat to human health. In other words, his orders tell him the plant is dangerous, but he's willing to accept that it isn't the case and that it's actually very important. Something that Otto, by contrast, refuses to even consider because it goes against his orders. But to get back on the topic of the characters, even the ones that in any other movie would just be generic or forgettable manage to stand out and be very likable, such as Mary and John. They perfectly represent how lost humanity has become and how, when awakened, they're able to find joy in the little things and are honestly ready to bring back Earth from the brink if given the opportunity. And even how a cockroach manages to be cute and hilarious despite never saying anything and doesn't even have a face. But of course, the best character is definitely Wall-E himself, followed closely by Eve. And this mostly comes down to the fact that their romance is the heart and soul of this movie, and done so perfectly that my words could never do it justice. Wally longs for love of his own and finally finds it in Eve, who views him more as a friend and occasional nuisance until she's finally able to understand his devotion to her. And really, how could he not endear himself to her? I mean, the little guy is cute, clumsy, innocent, and the most harmless and helpful robot you could ever meet. How can you not love him? He's the kind of robot humanity honestly hopes for from the future rather than something like the Terminator, which is most people's biggest fear for the future. But on a deeper level, their love is also significant because of something prevalent throughout the movie, which is the loss and reclaiming of humanity. At first, Wall-E is a little trash compactor that acts more human than anybody else in the movie, and through him, everybody else is gradually able to regain it themselves. To put it another way, Wall-E is about a people who've lost their way, regaining their humanity through the love between non-human robots, which, in many ways, almost makes the movie like a much more optimistic version of Blade Runner. Because while that movie portrays humanity's flaws just as prevalently as its strengths, and not unjustly so, Wall-E portrays humanity as something that can be great and wonderful when people who have it are good and use their self-awareness and free will with compassion, understanding, and for the right reasons, which is exactly what every character in Wall-E, human or robot, does. But the important thing to remember is all of this came about simply by a robot innocently trying to be with the female robot he had fallen in love with. And this is where that scene of the captain overpowering Otto comes back into the picture. Because, as emphasized before, unlike the other robots, Otto refuses to embrace the potential humanity inside him by questioning his orders or consider that a new development might be more important than those orders, and instead slavishly devotes himself to carrying them out as given, essentially making him nothing more than a glorified drone. And while the humans and robots were very similar to this before the events of the movie, they eventually come to either gain or regain their humanity and understand the importance of what must be done regardless of orders, as the captain himself beautifully demonstrates. And that's why the captain finally standing up to confront Otto is treated as such a big deal. Because Otto, in that moment, is showing just how far he'll go in service of his orders. He refuses to listen to reason, ignores all evidence, and is ironically causing a lot of harm to the humans he's supposed to be protecting. And the moment Wally's crushed, Otto has fully embraced the robot in him, showing how he goes by the letter of the law, not the spirit, just like any programmed machine. While by standing up, again, after being partially inspired by the little robot, the captain has fully embraced the humanity in him by using the very first tools we ever had, our own limbs, to do what he knows to be the right thing, no matter the cost to himself, and is just as determined to carry that out. To put it simply, the subsequent fight isn't just between a man and machine steering wheel, but a metaphorical fight between man and machine, and the fate of humanity lies in the balance, not on a literal level, but on a spiritual one. Because either Otto wins and suppresses the newfound humanity around him, symbolized by his crushing Wall-E, or the captain wins and the humans go on to regain their identity as both a species and as individuals, and restore the planet they had accidentally destroyed. And because of the way the movie depicts humanity, in the end, the captain is the one who wins out, rendering Otto nothing but the drone he already was. And this symbolism is only taken a step further when Wall-E is restored, showing that Otto's attempted repression was only temporary and extremely non-lasting, as the humans go on to make a new world with their newfound knowledge and awareness. To put it simply, not only does this movie tell a great story, but it sends a great message that's very optimistic about humanity and the future. And it manages to deliver all of this in a pretty simple way. And though Pixar has done similarly great with a few other of their movies, I still believe that they did it best here. As I said at the beginning, Pixar or not, animation or not, I believe this movie is nothing short of a masterpiece, and easily one of the best movies of the new millennium, both for the reasons I just went over, and for many others I didn't cover as well. Now, some of you out there may think differently, and I'm perfectly okay with that. But I will always stand by the fact that I believe Wall-E to be Pixar's Magnum Opus, and easily one of the greatest movies they ever made. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to cover. So now I'd like to hear what you think. Do you believe that Wall-E is Pixar's crowning masterpiece, or do you believe one of their other movies is more deserving of that distinction? Please let me know in the comments below. And as I just said, you don't have to agree with my stance on this video. You are just as entitled to your opinion as me or anybody else. And finally, thank you all for watching. I really appreciate all of it. And I hope to see you all next time.